Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds, hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
And today we got a GM tip for you for soloing Dungeons and Dragons.
Jump down the description below where you can sign up for Nerdarchy, the newsletter. Get weekly gaming tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
Alright, it's time to get your game on. Maybe only one of your players showed up, no one else is there, or your group is disbanded. You're left with one player, you can't find any players no matter where you go. You're not interested in looking online or even there. You've reached your limit. You can't find them. You got one player, so you're like, gosh darn it, I'm playing D&D anyway. And I'm going to play with this one guy or gal, as the case may be. We're going to D&D. What do you do?
All right, so we're going to talk about the pros and cons of running the solo game. And it's one of those things that it's a very different scenario if you're running tonight's session solo because some players didn't show up. This video is more along the lines of running a campaign for just that one person.
Now, I will point out there's a couple other YouTube channels, Dawnforge Cast as well as A Fistful of Dice. I believe they both have some solo sessions on, so you can check that out. It's just a GM and a player.
We've run a handful of games that are, 2 players, 3 players, don't have a whole lot of experience with the solo session.
No, usually we have at least 2 players in the game. But, we're going to draw on our vast experience with this game and DMing and come up with some ideas and our thoughts on the subject.
All right, so the first thing that you want to, that we're going to touch on are the pros. And that's, you don't need a lot of players. You just got to go for that one. So that's going to open up a lot or get rid of a lot of your issues.
Yeah, you don't have any inter-party conflict. There's less likely of a dietary conflicts because you have less people. Anytime you just have less people gathering together, everything is going to be easy because, like we said, conflict, dietary needs, scheduling. Your adults, your busy people playing make-believe. It's hard to find the time for everyone to gather at the table. All those things kind of get wiped away, for the most part, and it gets a lot easier. And we've had some of these issues come up in our own games.
Absolutely. Your game that we run here monthly hasn't played in a couple of months because of scheduling conflicts.
Because of scheduling. And then when we do get together, when it comes to food, we have some vegetarians in the group, so we're like, okay, we have to make sure there's options for them if we do group food and stuff like that. You want to make sure we're covering all of our bases.
But when you have the one player, one GM, it's a lot easier to settle those kind of, I wouldn't call them disputes because it's a conversation at that point in time. Oh, what do you want to eat? Oh, let's get this. Okay. Hey, what kind of game do you want to run? Okay, this. So that actually stems into, you briefly mentioned it, but inter-party conflict. There's a difference between player conflict off the table and arguments and stuff that are going to happen at the table. If you have one player interacting with the DM, there's no inter-party conflict. You're the player, you're the spotlight, you want to do X, you get to do X. End of story.
You call the shots, you dictate the pacing, all of that stuff. I mean, certain circumstances will come up in situations in the game that you have to deal with and are out of your character's control, but for the most part, you get to call all the shots.
And that actually stems into the next one is you're telling one story. You get to have something that's tailor-made to what the character wants, what the player wants, what you and the GM decide is going to be, the pure RP gold, because it's so much easier to do because you're not trying to satisfy 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players of what kind of story you want to have.
Yeah, this is easy on both sides of the screen. From the DM's aspect, you're not juggling 5 or 6 backstories and everyone to feel like they're going to shine and give them their chance to have the spotlight. Don't got to deal with that. From the player standpoint, you never have to worry about someone else stepping on your toes, not getting your spotlight time, not getting your chance to role play or do the thing that you do. No one's going to do the thing that you do better than you on your side of the screen for the most part. So from those aspects, it's all looking good.
So this is going to lead to great role playing, both as the GM and as the player. It's going to make you shine, regardless of which role you've done, because every encounter, everything that you do, it's just between 2 people. So you get to build this set of skills together in this experience without someone else stepping in to be like, oh, well, I wanted to say and I wanted to do.
It's very immersive. When it's just you and the GM and you guys are telling the story together, you're role playing back and forth, this is going to really push you and your skills when it comes to role playing, both as a DM and as a player.
So this is going to be, the midland point based off of that is as you said, the immersion factor is going to be a lot higher. When you've got a group getting together, there's a higher chance of someone breaking character. So depending upon what kind of amount of immersion you want, this is going to be more immersive, harder to break character. So it could be a pro, it could be a con, depending upon how comfortable you are in that vein.
I would also say too, like one of the things we kind of didn't talk about off air before we started was duration. I feel like just being two people in the game is going to change the duration. Maybe you want to run 5-6 hours, but that might be too intense, right? To be immersed that long. But that being said, you're going to get so much more done in the game in a shorter period of time because it is just two people going back and forth.
When you have downtime, when you are not involved in combat, everybody gets their turn. Everybody gets the ability to go do something. Well, if you have an average of 4 people at the table, okay, sometimes 2 people are going to go together, but things tend to get broken up. And I see that, in our own games. You see it in Critical Role. People want to go off and do things in groups and solo. Well, that gives the other person a chance to sit back, to breathe, and relax and be entertained by somebody else. Well, there is no sitting back. It's all you. It's all the GM. You're constantly going. So I definitely see that you could jam a lot into an hour game, a 2-hour game with just that one player, and you might need a break.
Yeah, and that being said, you might need to break immersion. You might need shorter sessions. Yeah, you might not be able to go as long. You might actually find it a little more exhausting after a little bit. And with that, because that's like a pro and a con, maybe we should go into the cons now.
All right. So first thing I have on the cons is bad dice rolling. Now, good dice rolling could change things, but that's not as big. But bad dice rolling, and I see it in games fairly frequently that somebody their dice are not rolling well that night. Well, when you're the only player and you can't roll above a 10, combats are going to go south for you. You might not be able to find the clues that you're looking for, and you get nothing accomplished because your dice are just sucking that night.
At least with a group dynamic, you might be, one bad dice roller of 5 or 6 people. So it kind of makes up for it. But if you're the only one rolling and they're all bad, it's going to change the type of game you're going to have.
So the town interactions is like, okay, well, I didn't convince the thing. I didn't pass my investigation check. I haven't found any clues. And those things aren't as bad. You have to then do more role playing and you have to keep going.
The story continues.
But when you get into combat and the bad guys are hitting you and you're not hitting them,
the story might not continue.
The story might not continue. You might wind up on the ground, and this is actually going to be a problem for the GM because you might be in that situation where it's like, I have to think again of what to do with your unconscious body because you couldn't beat up the goblins or you couldn't beat up the troll, you couldn't beat up whatever.
Right, and you're being nice. It was just assuming it's an unconscious body, not a dead body. And because that's another way to go. And the other thing is, too, as the player, if you're in a solo game, retreat and withdrawing should be an option on the table that you would think of much sooner than if you're in a group dynamic.
So we touched on the immersion factor and that being in that solo encounter or that solo game for so long, it might be beyond your comfort level because we don't have those out-of-game moments. You don't have I'm just going to go do a bathroom break. Well, when you do that, the other person's just sitting there waiting. You're going to have downtime every time somebody's eating, every time someone's using the facilities, every time, something happens out of the real world.
There's only on and off, which, comes into another thing, too, that we kind of discussed before we started, and that is playing a solo game, just you and the GM, is a very intimate experience. Because it's not like you're just talking, having a conversation. You're role playing. You're trying to be immersed in this fictional world. You're being another person. The GM's being other people, and you're just engaging with that one person. There's no back and forth between you and other people. There's no break while other people are role playing. It's just you and your GM on the whole time. You figure you're probably gonna be sitting like this, maybe even with a DM screen, and we're just role playing with each other. So I think that could be kind of intense.
I absolutely agree. And we've seen with the culture these days that people find D&D as a spectator sport. So as a player, when I'm not doing something, I can sit back and enjoy what's going on at the table, whether it's somebody else's turn in combat or whether we're in town and somebody's antics are causing a laugh. The Gobelos are pretty darn funny in your game. Some of the characters in the new Critical Role season are pretty darn hilarious. And that's enjoyable to watch whether you're at the table or not. So when you're running that solo game or you're in that solo game, there are no moments of that. I don't get to just sit back and watch. If I'm the DM playing for that solo character, I need to be paying full attention to that. Or if I'm the player and the GM is doing it, I need to pay full attention. I can't do that just amused, let's see how I'm going to enjoy this.
Yeah, everyone's just on.
So the next thing is there's no party roles. If you have one player, okay, well, all right, if I do the war cleric, I've got healing and I've got fighting ability, so I can tank and I can heal. Same thing with the paladin, but you're not going to be able to fulfill everything, even if you multi-class all over the place. You just can't do it all.
You just have to be a bard. That's as close as you can get.
But you're gonna be weak all around because you can't do it all.
Yeah, you're not going to be as good. So, this kind of speaks to the kind of stories you're going to tell or be different. DMs are going to want to partner that character up with NPCs and DM player characters, and I would avoid any of that. Be like, nope, you're just going to tell a different story. You don't need a healer. You don't need to have a healer. Long rest, short rest, you get hit points back. If you take something to heal you where you can get some healing, that works too. Occasionally you can use items or whatever, but you need to change the way you're playing the game. You can't play it like a dungeon crawl, like you're normally playing Dungeons and Dragons and a combat simulator. You need to focus on a story-based game if you're playing a solo character and tell stories. Think about novels and books. They're usually written about one person.
It's going to change what D&D is. You cannot go through and plan the normal scenario because a single player can't handle it all. First level character against a couple of goblins, he could easily die. And normally that shouldn't be a problem. Two goblins per PC at first level shouldn't be an issue because you're going to have multiple party roles. Yeah, somebody might miss, but somebody might do really well. You have spells that could take out multiple at a time.
Some of the problems with trying to fill roles in a game like this is, one, the GM will have to play a lot of characters at once, or you're going to have the player play multiple characters, right? Which I'm not a fan of either of those. I feel like you should just learn to tell different stories and find the fun in that game if you're going to do the solo game.
I actually had an acquaintance, shall we say. He used to game way back in first and second edition D&D. It wasn't unheard of for his game to have players play two characters at a time. And I've never done that. I've always found that a very odd thing, but it was one of those things that was a thing back in the day. And to try and do that as a solo game, I think it'd be kind of weird.
Yeah, I've seen it as well, but more so when I first started gaming and we played the game. The characters were invisible pieces on a board more so than we were playing a role-playing game and we're trying to tell stories with that game as well. It was more about the game part of the RPG than it was the RP part. So I find that happens. I mean, sure, it can be, but then when you talk to each other, then you're talking to yourself. It's weird. I'd rather just try and get immersed in one character.
And, that kind of comes down to, my last point. We've talked about this. It's going to be very RP heavy. We said that, you need to change the game. So you're going to have far more like 70, 80, 90% role playing. You can't do a dungeon crawl with one person. It's just not feasible unless like you're going a game and everything is just a minion until you get to the boss. That's like, okay, you don't have just one hit point.
It would have to be more like storytelling, throughout it, where you're kind of like solving puzzles and overcoming obstacles, and maybe not necessarily just beating the snot out of everything you come across and running it like a standard dungeon. Because I could see like if you're like playing where you have to infiltrate someplace and you have an objective, well, that is kind of like a dungeon, but how you go about playing that as the player, you shouldn't be like a typical dungeon crawl where you're just going to go, I'm going to kill this, next room I'm going to kill this, and next room I'm going to kill this. No, like, you're trying to outsmart things and get around things and subterfuge.
Sneaking past obstacles and being unobserved is the challenge. And that kind of game could be really fun to run solo style, and it's much better solo style because not in a typical party, not everyone is going to have a good stealth roll. So when you do these stealth missions, there's always somebody who screws it up.
Yeah, so you definitely fall right in with that. Why? And here's the other thing too. Like, depending on what the character is, your GM should be creating adventures around that character, stories around that character. So if you're playing a fighter in full plate, doing a stealth mission to get information, locked in a vault somewhere wouldn't really make a lot of sense. So there's things like that you would want to keep in mind.
So we'll sum it all up. You're going to tailor this adventure, whether it's the night or an entire campaign, to the character, to the player's wishes. You're going to have far more role-playing and intimate levels if you're going to do it, and you need to change the way you think about D&D if you're going to do it, because you can't run the same style of game for just one player.
So with that, guys, do you have experience with running the solo adventure? How do you do it? Did we get it completely wrong? We got a place where you can tell us all about. That's the comments. While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You can check us out over on nerdarchy.com.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.